Okay, so thank you to everybody. We're gonna take care of we're just working on that. We're gonna take care of meeting people. We just switched from the previous meeting. So I thank you for your understanding about this. We're very excited about this meeting. And I'm sorry, I'm talking while before passing it to Elizabeth, which is gonna pass it then after to me, I'm gonna say, we're gonna record this session just for the presentation of Claire, but we're going to stop the recording at the time where we're going to have the discussion so that everybody can feel comfortable being able to see whatever they feel they want. And so I just want to say that, up front, and I'm going to remind you later. And Elizabeth, I'll pass it to you to introduce Claire biography. And then
all right, one more time. So hi everyone, and welcome back to our final meeting or final seminar with Dr. Claire Parkinson this week. So for those of you who missed both her Rieberg lecture earlier on Wednesday and her Aqua Talk just a little bit ago, I'm going to give you just a very brief overview of Dr. Parkinson, and then I'll pass it right back to Isabella. So Dr. Parkinson received her BA with highest honors in mathematics from Wellesley College in 1970. She received master's and PhD degrees in geography and climatology from The Ohio State University in 1977. Dr. Parkinson then joined NASA Goddard Space Flight Center in 1978 at a time when female scientists were very few and far between, and she has remained there ever since. Dr. Parkinson has received an impressive number of honors in her career. I don't have time to go through and list them all right now, but let me just say that it's very impressive, and you should take a look at her bio if you get a chance. She has received multiple NASA Achievement Medals, including most recently the Distinguished Service Medal, which she was awarded in 2020. One of her passions is outreach, and she was particularly enthusiastic about this seminar because she has been so involved with encouraging females in STEM throughout her career. Dr. Parkinson is a fellow of the American Meteorological Society, the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, the American Association for the Advancement of Sciences, and the American Geophysical Union. She was elected to the U.S. National Academy of Engineering in 2009, the American Philosophical Society in 2010, and the U.S. National Academy of Sciences in 2016. Isabella. You're muted.
I'm muted. Thank you, Elizabeth. And I just want to say, we wanted to remind how cool and awesome Claire is, because she's so cool and awesome, and she cares about women in STEM, and she cares about diversity. And I think that that's very important. I wanted to say everybody can put questions today in the chat. They can chat directly to me if they want. They don't feel comfortable. We, again, going to stop the recording after Claire stop her presentation. And so everybody can feel free. I also want to point out that, we know that there are a lot of potential delicate issue and question that can happen when we talk about women in STEM, and so I just want to make sure that, what has been said here during the conversation is going to stay here. And so we have an inclusive place where to talk. And so please, just be aware of that. Also, we will, let's try to understand that we are coming from a lot of different backgrounds. We have a very international group. And so we may perceive things, and everybody, I believe, is trying to do his best to just, communicate the best way. So let's try to be understanding and be able to, to share and help each other to share in the best way. So let me just say a few words about, so I think the UCI, I want to say, has had a very strong commitment to diversity. We've done a lot of work. We have decade mentor in this call. I see Alessandra, and I just have to say, we have 4 screen of people, and this is amazing. And Elizabeth has been a very strong advocate for, she's the director of the California State Summer School and Mathematics Science program, and she does an amazing job with that. That's very important. And I think overall, we're really working hard, and there is a very big momentum to try to say, okay, what can we do for diversity? and for include as many people as we can also, in this community and make everybody feel part of it. And so this conversation comes also in this context. I just, if you can ask question, please use your raise hand, or you put it again in the chat, or in the, you can text me if you'd rather not to put it, share it with everybody. I want to say that it's pretty amazing. Claire is a pretty amazing person. We're very lucky. She joined in NASA in 1978, and as Elizabeth said, right at the end of her PhD, and she found herself in a team of essentially white male, and and I have to say, white male with very strong personality, and I think that was it was a challenge, and I don't know, maybe it was not. I feel there is a challenge for me now, Claire. I'm so sorry, it's like, even with like other people, but, and it must have not been easy back then to be a woman in science, to navigate through the system, but she did it. And in 1993, just 15 years after her PhD, she was appointed as a project scientist of one of NASA's biggest science mission named Aqua. And that was amazing. It was amazing. It would be amazing at this time. I think that at that time, it really were, it was a challenge. She had to make a decision about going to management and just maybe sacrifice some of the science. And a lot of things have changed since 1978. Promoting diversity at that time was not even in the conversation. And now we have so many opportunities for this. And so along the way, Claire, she has become very proactive, as Elizabeth pointed out, in promoting women in science. And we hope that Claire's experience is really going to be inspiring from you, and she can share. And please feel free to ask any question. We are going to save the question in the chat, and we're going to share it with Claire, and we're going to follow up. And potentially we can also things just came out of my mind right now to create a follow-up event if we figure out that that's good. So thank you for your inspiring career, and I give it to you, Claire.
Okay, Elizabeth and Isabella, thank you both for those very nice introductions. I am now gonna share my screen, I hope. It says host disabled attendee screen sharing.
Okay, you should try now.
Okay. Okay, good. Okay, do you see it?
Yes.
Okay,
awesome.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to start with some background here. I went to high school in central Vermont, Montpelier High School, public high school there. And part of the reason I bring this up is because, to me, one of the most important cases of gender discrimination in my life was the fact that in our high school, boys could be on all sorts of athletic teams. Girls could not be on one single one. I wanted to be on a basketball team, but there was no possibility. Girls were not allowed on any teams. I would have tried out for track and field if I could have done that. Boys could be on the high school basketball team, football team, baseball team, track and field team. There were all sorts of teams for boys. Girls could not be on a single high school athletic team. So that was a major disappointment to me, and certainly had a major impact on how I feel about other discriminations later on. Now, that particular one, I was just a few years too early, because Title IX came along in 1972. I graduated from high school in 1968. So in 1972, Title IX came along, and for every female after then, you would not have had this kind of discrimination anymore. Title IX had a huge impact I have a list of potential discussion topics at the end, and this is one of them in terms of the impact of Title IX. So if anybody wants to discuss that, that's on my list. I went to college at an all-women's college, Wellesley College, and so then I could be on the basketball team, so I was very pleased about that. But it was also a very different environment at a very different time than we're at now. After college, I tried to get a job. I had problems getting a job, and there were sound reasons that I totally understood, but it was still discouraging. So I wanted to be contributing, and I couldn't because of not being able to get a job other than very much part-time. So I ended up deciding I wanted to go work in Antarctica, and the place that would get me to Antarctica was Ohio State, because I was able to find out that they sent lots of teams down to Antarctica. So I went to Ohio State as a graduate student, and I did succeed in getting down to Antarctica. The gentleman on the far right in this picture is Terry Hughes. He was the professor who was leading this expedition. In 1969, finally, women scientists could go, American women scientists could go to Antarctica. There's very interesting history there. The Navy had been in charge of the US field programs in Antarctica until the early 1960s, and then the National Science Foundation, NSF, took over. And the Navy did not allow women to go on, women scientists to go on any field expeditions to Antarctica. And when NSF took over, they weren't allowing it either until Ohio State finally convinced them in 1969. And so they finally let the first females go. And it was a team of 3 females from Ohio State. And NSF said that they would just, it had to be all females because they were afraid of any issues that might arise with a mixed gender team. So that was the setup here. And then I didn't realize that when I went to Ohio State, I didn't realize that NSF had not allowed any mixed gender teams. But Terry Hughes really fought for allowing me to go on his expedition, and NSF allowed it. So this is the team, and we were on Deception Island, which is right off the coast of Antarctica, and doing studies on ice flows into a volcanic area that had just erupted. So it was great. I was thrilled to be a part. The fact that there weren't any other females really didn't bother me in the least. I just wanted to get down there and participate in the work. So this was great, and Terry and everybody else was great in terms of no issues whatsoever. It was only later that I found out how important that was. You know, if there had been issues like sexual harassment or something, then maybe it would have been much more difficult for the next females to get down. But at the time, I was just thrilled to be able to be participating. One problem that did come was actually on the ship down. We flew down to South America, but then we took a ship from Ushuaia to the Antarctic Peninsula. And the gentleman in the foreground with the white shirt, he's Captain Lenny. Captain Lenny did not want a female on his ship. This ship was the Hero. It was an NSF vessel, so he had to let me go, but he was infuriated, mostly at Terry for bringing a female. He ended up easing up after a couple of days, and he was actually very polite to me. But he was infuriated that anybody would have brought a female onto his ship. When I got to Goddard, 1978, this is a picture of the new scientists in the Goddard Laboratory for Atmospheric Sciences. And yeah, there are 15 people in this picture. 14 of them are males. So again, I was thrilled to be employed. I was thrilled to have a job. I was thrilled that, in contrast to high school when I couldn't be on the basketball team, here I could be participating in the scientific effort. So to me, I was just thrilled to be there, and the fact that the others were all men really was not a problem. This is the group that I joined into. It was led at the time by Jay Zwally, and here are the other members of the group. And again, I was the only female, but it really, that was not a problem for me, because I was so thrilled to have a job and to get to be a part of the scientific enterprise. And not only to get to be a part of it, but to actually get to be a part of it at NASA, which, you know, was just amazing to me that I could be a part of NASA, this agency that had done such phenomenal things. However, the fact that I was thrilled about it did not mean, and the fact that I still am thrilled about it, even 42 years later, I am still thrilled to be a part of the scientific community and a part of NASA. But the fact that I'm thrilled with all that does not mean that I haven't experienced gender discrimination. And it doesn't mean that I haven't seen it, felt it, been hurt by it. And so now I'm going to go into some of the common types of discrimination against women scientists. And first off, women scientists are often simply ignored. And this comes in many ways. And one is that even though we might be allowed at the table, we don't have a voice, because when we speak up, it's not listened to. And this happened to me a lot early on, a lot less now, but it's very common for women that they might say something during a meeting and, you know, that makes some suggestion on how to do something, and nobody says anything. And then 5-10 minutes later, a male comes up and says the same suggestion, and all of a sudden everybody's going, wow, what a great idea. And you're thinking, wait a second, I just said that same suggestion. So that certainly happened to me, and I've read it in texts on gender discrimination. I've heard it from other females, so I know that it is a common problem that females are not heard. This is another thing on my list for discussions later, in terms of there are ways to avoid this problem, or at least to lessen it. So there are ways, and we can talk about that later. But another thing is, especially in the past, now I hope not so much now, but there were men who simply wouldn't read a paper if the first author was a woman. I mean, they'd say, you know, they got more important things to do with their time than to be reading a paper by a woman. And if your paper doesn't get read, that certainly lessens the impact that you can have. And it certainly means you're going to get less citations. And studies have been done on like citations, and it does tend to be females get less citations than males. And it could be, you know, there are fewer people reading their papers. One anecdote I'll bring out, just to have a very specific anecdote that's sort of in the line of being ignored. I co-authored a book with Warren Washington, who's from the National Center for Atmospheric Research. And we co-authored a book on climate modeling. And the first edition came out in 1986, and then lots of changes happened in climate modeling over the next decade. So we did a second edition that came out in 2005. In between those two editions, in fact, a few years before the second edition came out, I was giving a talk. It was on my research, it was on my sea ice, so it wasn't on climate modeling, but I was about to give a talk at a university. And so I was there at this university for the day, and I was having lunch with a group of the professors, and one of the professors, who happened to be a female professor, one of the professors, when the topic of climate modeling came up, the professor said, "Oh, Claire, have you read Warren Washington's book on climate modeling?" And I said, "Oh, I'm a co-author on that book." And she said, "No. I mean the textbook that he wrote alone on climate modeling." And I said, I'm a co-author." And she said, no. I mean the one that Warren wrote by himself. And I said, "Well, I'll ask Warren about it." I mean, I didn't know what else to say at that point. So I just said, "Well, I'll ask him about it." So then I go on later in the afternoon, I give my talk at my seminar. And after the seminar, this woman professor comes up and she says, "Claire, after lunch, I went back to my office, and you are a co-author on that book." And this woman had been teaching from this book for years, and yet somehow she did not even notice the name. So even when a female's name reaches the cover of a book, sometimes it is still invisible. And I mean, this seemed pretty amazing, but that is just one anecdote of how females are often just ignored in ways that you totally would not be expecting. Other types of gender discrimination, being talked down to, not taken seriously, being referred to differently than a man who's in the same position. So one type of thing that never bothers me, my preference is to be called Claire, so that's my preference. But some women scientists, if a male scientist right in the same room is being called Dr. So-and-so, and yet she's being called by her first name, this is discrimination that I know some women do find offensive. Another thing is women being labeled negatively for behaviors that would be deemed perfectly acceptable if done by a man. And this would normally be things like being particularly assertive. And a woman scientist being particularly assertive is generally not treated quite as nicely as a male scientist being particularly assertive. Also being assumed appropriate for other roles. At Goddard, fortunately, we don't have the problem. We don't have women scientists being asked to make coffee, but I know some places that's been a concern, taking minutes in meetings, things like that. Being assumed to have other roles than the role you've really got. And that's often the case that, like a female scientist, if she's in some setting, might be assumed not to be a scientist, assumed to be something other than a scientist. And for one specific anecdote here, when I was being inducted into the National Academy of Engineering, it's a big event, and there's a reception that goes on before, and a colleague from JPL was being inducted at the same time, Moose Shaheen, and he and I had known each other for years. We were both thrilled to be being inducted. We were both thrilled that the other was being inducted at the same time. So this was great. An acquaintance of his comes up during this reception, and he comes up, says hi to Moose. Moose introduces the two of us. And this acquaintance turns to me and says, real friendly, nice. He goes, "Oh, hi, Claire, it's great to meet you. Is your husband being inducted into the National Academy?" And I didn't mind it at all. I mean, it didn't bother me in the least because it's so common, that kind of assumption that you're not in the role that you really are. So it didn't bother me in the least, but Moose was so phenomenal. He was so upset with this comment, and he just immediately corrected him, this acquaintance, and he was so apologetic to me and so wonderful in telling the man that I am being inducted and that I deserve to be inducted, and he was just fantastic. And that, for the men here, sometimes, you know, a male can really be helpful in a case like that, you know, to stand up for somebody who's being discriminated against. Now, the most serious type of gender discrimination would be physical harassment. I have never been physically harassed, so I have been incredibly lucky never to have been physically harassed. That is clearly the worst kind. But I have been verbally harassed a lot, and especially early on. And with one particular person is just over and over and over again. And that person, none of the people pictured in my previous slides ever harassed me, verbally or anyway. So I don't want anybody to start thinking they're going to guess who might have done the harassment. None of the people in the picture, for pictures previously. So, but I was harassed verbally a lot, and especially early on. A big moment for me came in 1991 with the Clarence Thomas hearings. Now, for those who don't know who Clarence Thomas was, he is a Supreme Court justice, and he had been nominated by the first President Bush. And during his confirmation hearings in October of 1991, Anita Hill, who had been a colleague of his, testified that he had sexually harassed her. And these hearings were big time media coverage at the time. People were glued to their television sets watching these hearings. What these hearings meant to me was this was the first time that I realized I didn't have to put up with the verbal sexual harassment. Prior to that time, I had just felt, well, the guy's not touching me, he's not doing anything, it's just words. How can I complain? It's just words. And so up until that time, I still was thinking, like, as a kid, I grew up with people telling me sticks and stones can break my bones, but words can never hurt me. A saying that I never liked. I always felt words hurt me a lot more than sticks and stones ever had. So I never liked that saying. But on the other hand, it had an impact on me in terms of thinking I'm not allowed to complain about some words somebody says. So this set of hearings, the Clarence Thomas, Anita Hill hearings, told me, no, I can stand up and say I am not supposed to be verbally harassed. Because in Anita Hill's case, she also was not physically harassed. It was verbal harassment. And yet that verbal harassment got huge press coverage and huge attention. And so I was able to speak with the person who had done the most harassment of me and just bring up these hearings to him, which certainly helped just to say, hey, you know, you really shouldn't be saying these things. So turning now to a couple of ways in which being in a small minority matters. So in my case, I was in a minority because of being female. In other people's cases, it might be racial or it might be some other reason. But if you're in a small minority, you do have to often adjust to fit better into the kind of majority style of doing things. And this can be difficult. And so again, I was so thrilled to be able to be in science, to be able to be participating, that, you know, I was willing to make adjustments. But as the community has gotten more and more females into it, it is so much nicer to have other females also, and not to have to make so many adjustments to do sort of like more the male style of doing things. And the other problem with being in a really small minority is it's kind of an added burden of you have to represent more than yourself. And this would be things like, well, I was on the colloquium committee at Goddard for 12 years. And I know that, like, every once in a while, there would be a colloquium that wouldn't be up to the standards of the others. And if one wasn't up to the standards and if it was given by a man, it would just be, well, he didn't give a very good colloquium. But if it was given by a woman, it would be, geez, maybe we should be a little more careful about asking women to be speakers. So you are representing more than just yourself if you're in a very small minority, and that's whether it's racial or gender or something else. And that's an added burden on things. Now, this is a picture to bring in something really, really positive here. This is a picture from a group photo from a symposium that was held at Ohio State back in October of 2018. It was called The Women in Antarctica Celebrating 50 Years of Exploration. This was the 50th anniversary of that team of 3 women back in 1969 who were the first women allowed down as American female scientists, allowed to go down to Antarctica. This conference was one of the most exciting, wonderful conferences I've ever been to. And it was, for one thing, just the fact that so many women are now able to go down to Antarctica and to do Antarctic exploration, but also the fact that at this conference, you had a lot of the early people who went down and just were so grateful to get down once. And now you've got mid-career people now in this conference who've been down to Antarctica 20 or more times. And what progress that is to have that. Plus, you've got young women who are able to go down without any kind of gender discrimination in terms of the selection of the team members. So, I mean, this conference was just terrific, and everybody was excited. I mean, the old people, the young people, everybody was excited to be here and to be a part of this. It was a 2-day conference. At dinner one of the 2 days, I was sitting next to a woman from Brazil. She had come all the way from Brazil. She wasn't even a speaker at this conference, but she had come all the way from Brazil because of the importance of this celebration of this 50th year anniversary. The speakers, the main speakers were all females. There were 3 males who spoke very briefly. One was from the Ohio House of Representatives, and he was reading a proclamation from the Ohio House of Representatives. The other was from the Columbus, City of Columbus Council, and he was reading a proclamation from them. So those 2 proclamations about this celebration of 50 years of exploration. And then the other male he spoke on very briefly at the beginning of the second day, and he was the provost of Ohio State University. And he got up and he said, yesterday I kept getting this feedback about this electric conference that's going on here. And I felt that that was such a good term in terms of this conference. It was electric. It was terrific. And it sure shows the difference of, the progress that has been made over the years. At Goddard, this is a book that we put out. I led this effort that's called the Women of Goddard effort. We published a book in 2011 that highlights 103 women in STEM careers at Goddard. It's one page for each woman, and it's meant to encourage girls especially, but it's also relevant for boys too, but it's meant to encourage girls especially to see the extremely exciting types of careers you can have if you get an education in STEM, and that those careers are now open, whether you're male or female, they're open to everybody. So, and then NASA tries hard to have diversity, and there are problems with, they don't succeed as well as we'd like, but there's such progress that's been made over the years. And the Aqua spacecraft is the one that I'm closely involved with. And the diversity within the Aqua leadership includes me. I'm a female and I'm the project scientist. My deputy is a male, Greek American. The science team leaders are all males, but one of them is Hispanic, so that is an element of diversity. Our resource analyst is an African American female. The mission director is a white male. The former instruments engineer for 9 years was African American female. And our algorithm maintenance principal investigators, well, it's dominated by males, but there are some females. It's 4 females and 27 males. We certainly do outreach to a lot of minority groups as well as to just any groups. So there's a lot of outreach going on. And to illustrate sort of the efforts at NASA, especially this past 12 months after the killing of George Floyd, when so many organizations are looking much more seriously at diversity now. And NASA Goddard is certainly one of those organizations that's put a lot of attention onto diversity right now. And these are just, there are 2 pages here. These are just the events that I attended. There are a lot more events this year that others attended and that I didn't have time for, but these are the ones I attended. Black History Month had wonderful, wonderful events in it. One that I'll point out is the importance of historically Black colleges and universities. That session, it was amazing, sort of the camaraderie of the Black members of the Goddard community who've gone to HBCUs, and there's such a level of pride at having gone to one of these historically Black colleges and universities. It was a very, very impressive session. But anyway, so the Earth Sciences Division, which is the division that I'm in, it's had diversity and inclusion discussions roughly once a month. And our the Cryospheric Sciences Lab, which is the lab that I'm in, we have diversity and inclusion events, discussions once a month. Also, a Women's History Month. Ellen Stofan was one of the speakers in the Women in History Month session that I went to, and she had a good quote in her comments. She said, and I've got the quote here so that I don't get it wrong, but if I can just find this. Ellen's quote. I hope I can easily find it. Well, I might not find the exact words, but her quote was that it's exhausting to try to be adjusting your style to somebody else's style all the time. And she was speaking specifically on this issue of it's exhausting to keep being the very small minority who has to adjust to the majority style. And now, wonderfully, in the Cryospheric Sciences Lab, there's a wonderful distribution of males and females. I mean, it's roughly half and half, and that's fantastic. I still sometimes end up the only female in the room at Goddard meetings, and like last Friday, it was a project scientist meeting, so it was a project scientist tag up with upper management, and so there were 14 of us. And as with the other project scientist meetings, you know, all the others are males. I'm the only one that's a female. So on those meetings, it still ends up I'm the only female in the room. But as I said, in the Cryospheric Sciences Lab, that's not the case. It's roughly half and half, and it does make a difference. So even before the George Floyd death, NASA has had an interest in diversity for a long time. And these, I just put down a list of the advisory committees at NASA. And so there's an African American one, an Asian Pacific American one. All of these were formed well before last year. So it's not just a new thing, this interest, a concern about diversity. Equal Accessibility Advisory Committee, Hispanic one, LGBT one, Native American one, new and developing professionals, veterans, and women's. So lots of advisory committees. And this is my last slide. And this essentially lists just possibilities of what we might discuss. So I'm going to turn out of slide mode now. And that is the end of, I hope I'm going to turn out of slide mode now. There, okay.
This was amazing, Claire. And I have to say, we got a lot of comment in the chat, and I got a lot of comment to me that people really enjoy it. And